Besides the disturbing story of Patient Sigma, Clive also shared another strange story he was involved in. The mysterious and sad case of Lucy. We all take our memories for granted. Happy or sad, we file them away in the recesses of our mind, only to dust them off every now and then when nostalgia beckons. Some linger wistfully. Some may haunt us for eternity. But ultimately, they are our footprints in the sand, fading with each passing tide. What few of us acknowledge is that those footprints aren't just records of our passage. They are our life. What we are is the sum total of our memories. Every decision we've made, every person that we've known, all the thoughts and dreams we've experienced are the unique patterns in the sand that let us know we've existed. Sometimes it takes a story like Lucy's to make us remember just how precious that is. Lucy had a very happy childhood. Growing up in a rural community, her days were filled with chasing butterflies and helping her loving parents tend the farm. She had an ongoing rivalry with her brother Ryan, who was 2 years older, that mellowed over the years to form the unspoken love and respect that binds siblings together. Ryan was obsessed with traveling the world and wanted to be an adventurer like Indiana Jones. One summer when she was 7, Ryan had the idea to create a time capsule for explorers from the future to discover one day. They had spent the morning gathering an odd assortment of coins, trinkets, family photos, and each wrote a letter to place in the box. They spent that afternoon digging a hiding place for the box under the oak tree, and capping it with a large stone. To help future generations find it, they had grabbed a knife from the kitchen to carve in the stone a large, crude X to mark the spot. Lucy remembered her parents grounding her for 2 weeks for destroying that knife, and not telling why she did it. She had agreed with Ryan that it was best for the box to stay secret for others to find. Lucy attended the local school that was an hour's walk away. She remembered making that walk 1,000 times, strolling with her brother and their neighbor Matthew. Matthew was just a few months older than Lucy, but had an easy charm that made him very likable. She had liked the way his hazel eyes would sparkle, and the way his nose crinkled when he laughed. She had loved the way he flicked his head to move his floppy brown hair from covering his eyes. It was convenient that they were in the same classes, so spent most of their childhood growing up together. They spent many summer nights as teenagers lying on the ground, gazing up at the expansive night sky. They would talk for hours of other worlds and the vastness of the universe, and how great it would be to explore the stars, if only they weren't so far away. She remembered that Matthew wanted more than anything to be an astronaut, and hid a jar under his bed to help save up for a trip into space. She remembered helping him spending an entire week of their holidays digging up weeds until their backs ached so he could add a few dollars more to that jar. Meager as it was still a few dollars closer to the stars. She remembered how the last day of that job turned into a mudball fight, which escalated into a friendly wrestling match, and how her blood raced when Matthew pinned her to the ground, half laughing and half exhausted. She remembered their first kiss laying there, and how alive she felt with the smell of dirt and cut grass and sweat. When they were 17, they carved their names, framed within a large heart, into the ancient trunk of the oak tree. She remembered wanting those days to never end. But Lucy also vividly recalled that Sunday, when she was 19, when Matthew changed and started acting strangely. He avoided her and always gave vague excuses for why they couldn't spend time together. The more she tried to talk to him, the more distant he became. Instead of coming over to watch TV as he had for as long as she could remember, he spent his nights alone in the woods. She had tried to follow him a few times, but he always seemed to know, and after weaving his way through the forest, she would lose his track, and he'd disappear. For an entire week, it seemed like Matthew didn't exist. His parents could provide no explanation either. Lucy remembered crying alone each one of those nights, tormenting herself about what could have gone wrong. Then one Saturday evening, right after nightfall, Matthew just as inexplicably showed up on her doorstep. With a devilish grin on his face, he asked her to follow him into the woods, but refused to explain why. He would only say that there was something she, and only she, had to see. No one else could follow. At once relieved and terrified, Lucy didn't know what to think. She recalled between her tears of joy and relief was a creeping sense of horror. Eventually, she relented under Matthew's insistence and charm, and they left together for the woods without anyone knowing. Lucy recalled thinking that the trail seemed darker and more sinister than she'd ever remembered it. She remembered how the adrenaline from her fast-beating heart amplified every sound around her. The crunching of twigs on the ground, the chirping of insects, the buzz of mosquitoes, and the flapping of birds disturbed in their nests. She remembered how tightly Matthew gripped her hand as he led her through a labyrinth of trees, and she remembered how cold and nervous he seemed. Eventually, the dense foliage cleared to a wide open space in the forest, and to a sight that would be forever seared into her memory. Along the far wall of the trees, wires were strung out, upon which were hung rows of jars with delicate care. In each jar were hundreds of fireflies, glowing a ghostly green in the dark. From where she was standing, Lucy could clearly make out the words they formed. "You are my universe." It was the second most beautiful thing Lucy had ever seen in her life. The most beautiful was the very next moment, when she had turned around to see Matthew. He was on his knees, and in his hand was a ring. A single star sapphire surrounded by a constellation of diamonds. She remembered wondering how Matthew could afford this, and noticing that the first jar of fireflies was the same jar as the one under his bed. With tears welling in her eyes, she emphatically said yes. For that night, their entire universe was the intimate space of that clearing, and they spent it making love surrounded by starlight. When her family found out about the news about her engagement, they were ecstatic, though not surprised. Though a few weeks later they had to accelerate the wedding plans, as Lucy found out that she was pregnant. Though her parents were ever so slightly embarrassed about the prospect of almost having a child out of wedlock, it was more than overcome by their joy at being grandparents. During her first trimester, her parents drove her to the local hospital for a prenatal examination. There were some unusual results, so she was asked to stay overnight for more tests and was given a bed. When she awoke that morning, her whole life was turned upside down. The doctors told Lucy she had a phantom pregnancy, that there was no child inside of her. Confused and distraught, she felt her world starting to collapse around her. She called her parents to pick her up, only to find that their number had been disconnected. By late afternoon, she was distraught that they hadn't shown up to take her home. Distressed, she contacted Matthew's number, only to have a stranger pick up the phone. Now on the verge of hysteria and panic, Lucy had to be sedated for her own safety. Clive was brought in to do the psychiatric evaluation, but could find nothing wrong with Lucy. She seemed perfectly normal, considering the circumstances, and it was odd that no one had picked her up from the hospital. Finding her identity card amongst her belongings, he agreed to drive her home. Arriving at the listed address, they found a derelict farmhouse, where wild grass grew so high it almost obscured the entrance. Entering the home, they found it abandoned. An entire wall had caved in and caused the roof to collapse. Years of exposure to the weather rendered the house uninhabitable. Only the strewn debris of long-gone squatters remained. Rushing to the backyard, Lucy found the tall oak tree still standing guard over a half-buried stone marked X. The carved heart was still there, a faint, fading scar upon the bark. On digging up the buried box, the contents were found to be almost empty. Driving to Matthew's home, his parents showed no flicker of recognition towards Lucy. They informed them that the farmhouse next door had been abandoned for over 15 years. The family living there had a son, but they had all died when a drunk driver lost his way and drove his truck into the side of the house, killing everyone inside. When Lucy asked about Matthew, they exploded with rage and firmly asked her to immediately leave. Matthew was the name they had wanted to give their son, but he was stillborn 20 years ago. They didn't appreciate it being made a joke of. Lucy tried calling all the numbers she had on her phone, and while she knew details of their life, each and every one did not recognize her. It was as if the universe itself had abandoned her. With no further leads, Clive eventually had her committed to an asylum, where she now waits out her days. The first few years she struggled angrily, but as hope faded, defiance turned to grief, and then to acceptance of her fate. As much as she tries to forget her past and move on, the precious few items she has remaining anchor her to a mysterious past. A faded family portrait found in the box under the oak, and a star sapphire ring surrounded with diamonds. With no identity and no one to recognize her, she now spends her time like a specter, waiting and wondering when that day will come when she too will fade from existence, her footprints in the sand washed away by the passing tide. So treasure your memories, all of them, good and bad, for you never know. One morning, you may wake up to find everyone you know has vanished, and memories are all that you're left with.